Hello, record players. Scott with you again. I'm very happy to be joined today by a man who became a mainstay in Canadian music in the 1970s with a band called Fludd, and then went on to front one of Canada's best rock bands, Goddo. He needs no introduction, but I will give him one anyway. He's a musician, a songwriter, producer, and an author. The one and only, welcome to the record player Scarborough's own Greg Godovitz. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much, Scott. It's nice to be here in cyberspace with you.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you. You were born and raised proudly, and I've heard many people say proudly. He's very proud to be from Scarborough, Ontario.
Yeah, I love it here. Still live here.
You're still in Scarborough?
Yeah, I left for 8 years and went and moved to Alberta. Took up residence in Calgary, and really enjoyed it. But when it was time to come back, I decided right around where I grew up would be really nice. So heart of deepest, darkest Scarborough it is. And, I got, there's a lot of musicians around here. Larry Gowan just lives down the street from me,
Oh.
and it's one of those. Leona Boyd lived out here, and, the guys in the Bare Naked Ladies. I mean, Scarborough's like a melting pot of super talented people.
Did you, growing up in Scarborough, did you always know that you wanted to be a rock star? Like what was it that you wanted to do growing up, or was it that?
Well, I was more of an academic when I was a kid. Like I was getting high grades all the time. And then one fine day, my brother came in, my older brother, with a copy of Beatlemania with the Beatles. And I saw that front cover shot with them in half silhouette with their little tiny Beatle haircuts. And I went, they look stupid. And then my brother dropped the needle on the groove, and It Won't Be Long came on. And that was the beginning of the rest of my life.
Wow.
I just knew instantly that that's what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. And as it turned out, I mean, we're not quite over yet, but for the last 57 years, I've been a musician.
That's great. And the Beatles obviously had a huge impact. That's where you decided you wanted to be a musician. You went on and I think you did a Beatles tribute record. You did an annual John Lennon show.
Yeah.
So the Beatles have always.
Well, if it wasn't for them, if it wasn't for them, I wouldn't be having this conversation with you. I mean, they changed my life mostly for the better. I mean, the greatest pop music ever written. I mean, their stuff will be like classical guys like Mozart and Beethoven and those guys. It'll be around forever. I mean, the music, the quality of the quantity of their music is just beyond unreal. So yeah, they've been a big part. I collect Beatles memorabilia to this day.
Oh, really?
And yeah, and I know a lot of their songs. And every time I've had a couple of bands, one in Calgary and one here that we called the Dick Clark Five, even though there was only 4 guys in the band. And we played British Invasion music. I mean, that's the music that got me going. Was one day it was the Beatles, the next day it was the Animals, then the Stones and the Kinks and the Who, Freddie and the Dreamers, Jerry the Pacemakers. I mean, every day in 1964, something else incredible was on the radio.
You met Paul McCartney?
I've met Paul and I've met Ringo and I've met George Martin. I've met Alan Williams, their first manager. I had Pete Best and his brother Rogue over for dinner one night.
Really?
Pretty heady stuff. I mean, but the thing is, it's like when I met Paul and Ringo, it was like talking to you. They were just such a big part of my life that when I went into their dressing rooms and met them, it was like, first of all, I didn't talk about the Beatles to them. I talked about baseball with Paul. And I was up at Ringo's rehearsals up at Casino Rama because Steve Lukather's a good friend of mine. And he, knowing I was a big Beatles fan, invited me up for the rehearsals. So when Ringo came in, we established, first of all, that he doesn't shake hands. He just bumps forearms, which he does. And then I said, I've been hanging around for the last couple of days while you've been rehearsing. I said, you look great. You're singing great. It's too bad you couldn't get anybody good in your backup band, And of course, Luke is standing there and he's got, Todd Rundgren in his band and he just started laughing. Right? And it broke the ice, and then we just talked, And I think that's a trick, they don't want people gushing all over them. They want to talk about baseball or something else,
because he's talked about the Beatles extensively forever with anybody who's ever met him. So he probably just wants to be a normal guy.
Yeah, and you know what? At the end of the day, that's all they are, is they're just normal guys. I mean, I'm assuming that Paul McCartney doesn't jump out of bed and put on both pant legs at the same time. I'm assuming they have a washroom in their house somewhere, you know?
Really? No. How old were you when you started playing bars around town and started your own?
Oh,
Probably
okay, that's
not
a great
old enough to be in the band, but or in the bar.
that's a great question, because I was in my first band when I was 13 with Brian and Ed Pilling, that would eventually become Flood. You know, they wrote all those great songs. And my mother worked at the Friars Tavern at Yonge and Dundas. It became a hard rock cafe.
Mhm.
Now it's a Shoppers Drug Mart with a little bit of a Toronto history museum in the top, thanks to the guy that runs it. And I would go down on Saturday afternoons and watch the bands that were playing. Now, the first time I went in there, it was Levon and the Hawks were playing afternoon. That, of course, turned into the band.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they became the band. And I was 13 years old, sitting with Rick Danko, who convinced me that I had bass player hands, and then proceeded to sell my mom my first bass amp. And I met Ronnie Hawkins that day in there. I met David Clayton Thomas. 40 odd years later, I'm Ronnie Hawkins's band leader for some strange reason. But getting back to your question, we got to a set in between Hawks Saturday afternoon. So Brian and Ed and myself and this guitar player named George Kelly, we played some Beatles songs and stuff like that. We did a half an hour. And Dave Johnson and Bob McAdory from the powerful Chum AM station saw us and took us that evening up to what was Club 888, which became the Rock Pile, where Led Zeppelin and all them played. And we played a set with a band in front of 1,000 people that night. I don't know who the band was, probably an R&B band. And the next thing I know, we're hired to play at a place on Yonge Street. Now I think I'm 14 years old. It was called the Rocket A Go-Go. And the gig started at 1 o'clock in the morning until 3. So I was playing at an after hours bar at 14 on Yonge Street. And of course, you know, my school career was finished, because, you know, I'd be dragging myself into school. I couldn't even keep my eyes open, you know, but I didn't care at that point. Academically, I'd done everything I wanted to do by grade 8. And you only have to count to 4 to get most rock songs in. So I was set, you know.
You were in a band going back a little bit before Flood. You were in a band called Sherman and Peabody.
Sherman and Peabody, yeah.
With correct me if I'm wrong here, because I always get his name wrong, but Buzz Sherman.
Buzz Sherman, yeah, who became the great singer for Moxie, yeah.
Right. And Gil Moore from Triumph.
Well, Gil was in a later version of the band. The original Sherman and Peabody came out of a band. Brian and Ed went to England when I was 15. And my parents, who were very, very lenient, said, no, we are not sending our 15-year-old to live in England. No, you're not going. So I was devastated. But the next thing I know, I answer an ad in the Toronto Telegram, I think, back in those days. Singing bass player wanted for Chicago blues band. Okay, all right. Okay, I'm a singing bass player. I called him up. The guy says, how old are you? I'm 15. I tell him I'm 16 because it sounded so much more mature. And they fell for it. And then I joined these guys. We were called the Backdoor Blues Band. Now, this was my once and always and forever chiropractor, John B. Arneson. He ended up in Whiskey Howl. Wayne Wilson, who was the drummer in Whiskey Howl, and Dave Wood, who's an amazing guitar player that became a professor of music. And I played bass, and we had a keyboard player. And they said to me, the Rolling Stones didn't write these songs that you know. These songs were written by guys named Muddy Waters and Howlin' Wolf and John Lee Hooker and those guys. So they gave me a crash course in the blues when I was 15 years old. Then one thing led to another, we went in another direction again into the psychedelic era with Eddie Schwartz, who wrote Hit Me With Your Best Shot. He was in my next band, the Mushroom Castle. And then, no, I'm sorry, I have to back up. Then for some reason, Buzz joined the band, and we morphed into Sherman and Peabody from that band, from the Backdoor, and then became Sherman and Peabody. And we played the Rock Pile a lot. It was a club we played in Yorkville in the Yorkville Village days, in these basement clubs, and of course, you see people. When I was living down in the village, one night at the Riverboat, it would be Neil Young for Monday to Wednesday, Joni Mitchell Thursday till Saturday, Chris Christopherson the next night, Junior Wells and Buddy Guy next week, Gordon Lightfoot, Neil Young. It was insanity. And of course, we didn't have $3 to get in, but we would sit outside and listen to these people who were going to become international superstars. So it was quite an education for a guy that wanted to be a writer and a musician. And I took full advantage of it. Your brain's a sponge. And mine was getting full. There was a lot of influences going down.
That's amazing. When Brian and Ed came back, that's when Fludd started, when they moved back to Toronto.
Yeah, they had a version of Fludd that I wasn't a part of. I was still, I think, living down in the village, but I came out to a high school not far from where I'm living now, just up on Midland Avenue, and they were playing. And I looked at the girl I was with and I said, I've got to get in this band with these guys again. I mean, you could just see that there was something there.
Yeah.
But they were doing cover songs then. I know they were doing Moody Blues songs. Gypsy, I think we did, and things like that. But they were also writing great songs. And so I basically, gave Brian a nudge and said, hey, why don't you get rid of this guy that's in the band and get me in? And they did. And I ran into that guy in Calgary. He says, do you know who I am? I said, why, have you forgotten? And he said, I'm the guy that was in Fludd. And I said, how did your career go? He goes, not as good as yours did. Thanks a lot, Sorry.
So needless to say, he's not a big Greg Godovitz.
He sent me a picture giving me the finger not long ago.
Nice. That's nice.
But I took it, with a pinch of salt like everything else. And sorry,
Fludd had, and I'll admit Fludd was a little bit before my time, but when I went back and listened to some of the Fludd songs, I was like, I remember that song. I remember that song. I remember that song from when I was growing up. You guys had some pretty decent success. It's not like Fludd was a unknown Canadian band.
No, we were the big bands in Toronto at that era were Lighthouse. Mm-hmm. Lighthouse plays for peace. Mm-hmm. Crowbar plays for money. McKenna Mendelsohn Mainline played for something else, and Fludd played for the Chicks. We knew our strengths. But they were the four big bands at that time in Toronto. And then because we were recording, we got to go coast to coast and tour. We recorded our first album in San Francisco, in San Mateo, with Freddie Cotero, who had worked with Santana. He'd worked with all the San Francisco bands. Yeah. We got flown down to there. I was like 19 years old. My first airplane ride. You get out, there's a limousine waiting for you. Guy gives you $100 from the record company, Jeez. And then we're in the studio with these guys and meeting guys from Santana and stuff floating around. And then eventually I saw a 2-page ad for a studio in Oxfordshire called The Manor that turned out to be Richard Branson's first venture with Live-In Studios.
Really?
So you would stay, the castle that was there was built by Oliver Cromwell. And then in the barn, which was like kitty corner to the house, they converted it into a recording studio.
Wow.
And I showed it to the guys, and about a month later, we're there. Mike Oldfield's recording Tubular Bells at the time. Graham Bond, that had the Graham Bond organization with Jack Bruce and Ginger Baker. Mm-hmm. He was hanging around. I was playing music with him every night. It was, like I said before, it was heady stuff for kids. Like we were actually living that dream that everybody wants to live, the rock star dream, Now, granted, we didn't make millions of dollars by any stretch of the imagination. Or as Ronnie Hawkins always said to me, he says, Goddo, we're both cut from the same cloth. And I say, how do you figure, Hawk? And he goes, well, we both made $1 million, but we spent 3.
the but you weren't in it for the money, especially then. I mean,
No,
never
well,
really were, right?
what did we know? I mean, like if somebody gives you $100, you're like a millionaire. We didn't know. We were, we were on tour, so you're staying in hotels all the time. You got a per diem. There's food at the venue. It's catered and everything.
You didn't need
You're in such a weird bubble that you have no idea that just outside of that bubble is bitter reality, where you go back to Toronto and you're cashing in beer bottles to eat. So I'd be on the phone going, when are we leaving again? Well, it's Friday. You're leaving Monday. Thank God for that. And so we spent all our time on the road, and you're paying your dues. I wouldn't change a thing of it.
You left Fludd to start your own band, Goddo, to be the boss, I would assume, to do your own stuff. But that was right after Cousin Mary, which was probably the breakthrough song for Fludd. Like that was I'd say.
Well, they'd already had Turn 21 that we recorded in San Francisco.
Mm-hmm.
And then we had, I think Cousin Mary would have come out next. Ed could correct me on that. But they were both hits. I mean, we had 8 top 10 hits in the time I was with Fludd.
So why leave?
Well, because I wrote a number of songs that became standards for Goddo during that time.
Right.
And the writing was sort of on the wall when my mother told me that she'd had a chat with Brian Pilling and said, my Greg is writing some good songs, as a mother would do,
Mm-hmm.
And he said, you forgive me, Mrs. Godovitz, but Fludd is my band. And I realized right then, about 1974, that they were not going to record any of my music. So it was time to, sayonara, and there was no hard feelings. I mean, right up to the time that Brian passed away, I mean, I always remember, I mean, our first album, sonically left a lot to be desired, but who cares? The second album stands up to this day. Mm-hmm. And I remember looking at Brian when I played it for him the first time, and I could just see his eyebrows raising up, and that was good enough for me, that. Now, having said that, the first album, I become good friends with Eddie Kramer in the last couple of years. And for those people that don't know his name, Eddie Kramer did all of Jimi Hendrix's music, 4 albums for Kiss, 2 for Led Zeppelin. He did the Beatles and the Stones. Probably easier to say who he didn't record as opposed to who he did. And he remixed the first Goddo album from scratch, and it sounds like Led Zeppelin with me singing.
Wow, that'd be interesting to hear.
Well, we're going to get it out on vinyl as soon as we can.
Good. I remember, and again, a little bit before my time when it was happening, somebody actually, this is funny and I'll show you this. Somebody sent me.
I remember that gig.
Do you?
Yeah.
Somebody
was a great place.
Somebody sent me this a few weeks ago, before we had even booked this interview, and I thought it was funny. And then when we booked the interview, I thought I'm going to print that off and show him. This is just down the road from where we are right now. This club.
I love that Norville Junction. Look at this one I found. This is Goddo with special guests. Guess who? Open for us.
Guess who opening for you? That's
yeah. And now it wasn't Burton wasn't in the band, but Gary and Jim Cale were there, and it was like a second. Cale owned the name, and I remember when we got there. I've known Jimmy for years, forever. Even when they were big, I knew him, and I remember him coming in, and I said, "Geez, Jim, I got to tell you, I feel really weird about this gig because." He says, he puts his hand on my shoulder. He goes, Greg, this is your 15 minutes of fame. Enjoy yourself. Because he knew how fickle the business could be. 1 minute they're the biggest band in the world, and the next minute they're opening up for us.
Yeah.
It's the way things go,
But I remember seeing you guys when I was not old enough to be there, but at places like Spanky's in Brampton.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And I know you recently played Spot One before everything shut down, and also in Brampton. But yeah, Brampton was where I was from. And so I remember seeing you sneaking into these places because I was 15, 16 years old at the time.
I would have let you in anyway, because I was always doing that, letting underage kids in.
Thanks. I appreciate that.
Yankees was a great gig. We did 2 shows a day there twice.
Spanky's was awesome.
Like,
There was a lot of cover bands played there. A
yeah,
Genesis cover band called Over the Garden Wall, which I love to see there all the time. And then
yeah.
you guys were there constantly.
Yeah, Gary Brigden that ran the place got us to play. We did it twice. We did 2 shows in one day,
Wow.
and they were both completely sold out. I mean, that was a golden era of music in this country, where you could work. We could stay when we weren't on the road. We could play gigs in Toronto 6 nights a week without repeating ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a far cry from the earliest days when you would play a club for 6 days.
Right.
We all did it. You did 6 days with a matinee on Saturday. So you're doing matinee and then the evening performance. And boy, that much like the Beatles going to Hamburg, that was our Hamburg, you know, because if you weren't tight when you went into that club, you were damn tight when you left it, you know.
There was always, every night on the radio, it seemed to be Goddo's playing at Elmo, Goddo's playing at the Gasworks, Goddo's playing here.
The Knobby, yeah.
The Knobby. That's what I want to talk about. The Knobby was kind of the home base for you guys. Like, that's where you guys played probably the most, I would say.
Well, it was right up the street from where I'm living now. I've always said about the Knobby, and I was just there not long ago because they tore it down finally. And I always said about the Knobby, you could put 500 people in there. You do 3 legitimate encores, and somebody in the audience would still punch you in the face on the way out.
Well, it had that reputation, right?
It's happened a few times. The girlfriend thought you were cute, so the guy walks up and punches you in the face. You
know, that was.
I'm going to show you. By the way, just so they don't know, I would just want to show you this. Sure. This, folks that are viewing in, this is my first book, available at that place down there, shopgreggodovitz.com. You can read that on yours, can you?
No, but
yes.
We'll figure.
Right.
Yes.
You can't see that on yours?
No.
Oh, it's there anyway. and then this is my new book, Up Close and Uncomfortable, a laugh riot, apparently a laugh riot. So if you want to, do something nice for an old man, please buy my books. Thank you.
I was going to ask you about the book for sure. When you went to start writing the book, the first book, was that just, you've been touring all these years. You've got sort of a reputation as being the party guy. Eric Burden once said that he thought he was a party guy until he read your book. Was that just these stories? Nobody's ever going to believe some of the shit we've done, so I got to get it out in a book, or?
Well, what actually happened was Dave Bedini, from the writer and the guitar player for the Real Statics, was writing a book called On a Cold Road, and gathering stories from guys in bands like me who had been on a cold road. And I ended up with 22 pages of stories in his book. So when the review came out, Peter Goddard, the famous and feared and super intelligent writer, rock critic, came out. I was reading the paper one day and I saw a review for Dave's book. And Peter, who was ruthless, if he didn't like you, you knew it. He says, most of the stories in the book are pretty mundane, with the exception of Greg Godovitz, who should clearly write his own book. And I started writing travels that day.
Wow. And
I realized, I'm reading Bedini's book and I'm going, hang on a second, I got more stories in here than he does. So I agreed with Peter. And then I'd kept diaries for 30 years. I had thousands of ticket stubs and concert posters and fan letters. I kept everything, reviews from the newspaper. Mm-hmm. So this book was easy to write because it wrote itself. I just had to take the time to put everything in chronological order. Here's all the photographs from the blues days. Here's the photographs from the Pretty Wednesdays. Here's the Goddo stuff. And what I liked about it was I didn't have anybody edit the book. So what I noticed about my writing was when I was writing about stuff in the 64, when I was 13 years old, the writing is sort of amateurish. But then I noticed one cool thing. As the bands got better, the writing got better because I was learning on the fly how to write a book. And I don't know if anybody's ever noticed that, or no reviewer ever caught that, but I noticed a certain amateurishness to like the early chapters of the book. And then, all of a sudden it's like Hemingway. No, it's not. But you know what I mean? It gets better. The writing gets better. So I started with this book. I started at the Hemingway thing and then went off from there. So.
did you did you ever, as you were writing the book, think to yourself, even I can't believe I did half of this stuff? Like,
Well, I had the two things I got the most were, oh, hang on, the birdies are tweeting.
well, I can hear that.
Must be 3 o'clock somewhere. The I like when the owls come in at noon because they're really loud. I had a couple of interviews like that.
You don't have.
Would you ask me? Oh, yeah. The two things that people said to me was, "It's amazing you're still alive."
Yes.
And I don't recommend that anybody reads this book in bed with their spouse, because my wife would be smashing me going, "What are you laughing at? What is that idiot doing now?" And for some reason, they both turned out really funny. And I'm glad, I mean, especially with what we're going through in the last year, I'm glad I finished the second book when I did, because everybody could use a laugh, you know? And if I've got a couple of days worth of humor in this book for somebody that, you know, wants to pick it up, the mission accomplished, you know, writing a humor book. I'm working on my third book right now. And of course, I have to write something about what we're going through. And my gal has read some of it. She goes, "How the heck can you find this much humor in what's going on here?" I said, "Well, there's that old, you know, adage, maxim, time plus tragedy equals comedy." Right? So we've been through a lot of tragedy in the last year. The good news is that Trump is out of office, so that's
But that takes away a lot of the comedy, I find.
well, he's still going to be in my book because, I mean, as much as I couldn't stand the guy and was thinking this guy's going to kill everybody on this planet, he was funny,
Oh, yeah.
inadvertently funny. But I would watch the news at nighttime just to go, let's see what this moron has to say. Much like people that are watching me right now are saying.
I'm a huge Saturday Night Live fan, and I remember thinking to myself, what the hell are they going to talk about now without Trump?
It's true.
Right?
It's true. Yeah.
I want to bring up something that I loved, and I probably watched the performance a million times. You guys did the very first simulcast.
Yes,
the
we did.
First, like before Much Music did simulcast and stuff. It was City TV and Chum. I don't know if it was Chum AM or Chum FM. But you guys were the first ever simulcast, and it was was it at like a church or a torn down church or something like that?
It was at the church is now it's a Hare Krishna temple. It's on Avenue Road. I drive by it quite a bit. And because our album at the time, I just happened to have a prop right here, was the Act of Goddo album.
Mm-hmm.
You see that without the?
Yep.
These are the English releases, by the way. We got 3 of them available: the Act of Goddo and the famous Who Cares and the other one. But we did it. So Act of Goddo in church, it made perfect sense. And then of course we had a guy, they dressed up a guy like a conductor. They had
at the beginning.
Yeah. And then we came slamming on. Now, the weird thing about that show was I wore that, which has become a pretty iconic. I had a custom made leopard skin 3-piece silk suit made like an old 50s rockabilly guy. That suit arrived 10 minutes before we went live to air. I was freaking. I was wearing a Mickey Mouse sweatshirt, not even a t-shirt, but a big bulky Mickey Mouse sweatshirt and green baggy corduroy pants. And this girl comes running in and I'm screaming, you know, and she's basically getting the needles and like pinning up the legs, like while they're counting us in. It was horrifying. I mean, live television, and then that happens, right? But it all worked out. The next morning, of course, you know, Canadian rock star, I'm on the subway going to my mom's house, you know, and this little old lady's across the way, and she leans over, she goes, "I really enjoyed your show last night on television." Only in Canada, man, you can have your own television show and be riding the subway the next day.
Oh, that's hilarious.
I did that when we played Maple Leaf Gardens. I went to the gig on the subway.
Really?
With my bag, with my clothes in it. And people were on there going, "Well, what are you doing?" And I said, "I'm playing at the Gardens." And they said, "Yeah, we know. What are you doing on the subway?"
Why are you here?
"I'm going to the gig, same as you." And they loved it, you know.
Oh, that's funny. I remember that show, and I remember the suit. I was going to mention the suit actually because that's an iconic look from that time. I remember watching that and just thinking, these guys are awesome. These guys are like what every kid should want to be.
Well, it was our height of what we were capable of before all the, nonsense, made its way into our lives. So we were at the top of our game. There's no doubt about it. I mean, for three guys, we made a heck of a noise.
Oh yeah.
That suit hung for many years in the downtown Hard Rock Cafe. I knew it was going in there, and I took my mom and dad down for lunch one day, stuck them in the booth. It was right by where my mother used to check coats when it was the Friars Tavern. So I called Nancy over, who was the manager, introduced her to my mother. My mother, of course, says, "You should have something of my son's hanging up in here," like a mother does. And and Nancy says to my mom, "Mrs. Godovitz, if you'll just turn around," because I put him in the booth where my suit was on display with the, what they described what it was and everything. It was beautifully done. She turns around and she reads it. She goes, "It's about time you got some respect to this city." Yeah, she said the F-bomb. It's about time you got some effing respect to this city. She was just unbelievable, man.
Oh, that's Pretty Bad Boys comes out, and that's, there you go. You got it?
I don't have a
You don't have that one?
I've got this though. I can show you.
Oh, that's cool.
This was done by Long John Baldry.
Really?
We were managed by the same people. Angela Bowie, Roy Young, that played with the Beatles in Hamburg, John, and us. And one day I'm at the office and I look over his shoulder and he's drawn this. And I went, "Hey, that's me." And he writes Goddo on the jersey right there.
Yeah.
He goes, "As a matter of fact, it is you." And he gave it to me. So we're selling repros of these. Please buy something, please. GregGodovitz.com. Okay, you're asking me about the Pretty Bad Boy, yeah?
I'll paste it all over the interview when we post it, I promise you. GregGodovitz.com.
Oh, thank you, yes. Yeah.
Pretty Bad Boys. Was that, now I've talked to a lot of people who hate the hit, right? They hate the song that they're most known for. Do you feel that way? Like, is that a song that you just don't like, or do you appreciate that song for what it gave you, or both?
That Christmas, I gave my mom and dad a wicker basket full of different things in front of all their friends that used to come over Christmas Eve, and they're going through it, and there's like a baguette, and there's a piece of cheese, and there's a beret, and then there's a book on how to speak French and stuff. And at the bottom of it was 2 first-class tickets to London and Paris for 2 weeks, all expenses paid. I loved Pretty Bad Boy. That was the rock star gift I always wanted to give my mom and dad for their contribution. So somebody sent me, I still have it somewhere, they'd get a piece of Bristol board with every single chum chart that we were on. Pretty Bad Boy was on the chum chart for 28 weeks.
Wow.
I mean, think about it.
Yeah.
And it peaked at number 5. No Floods. I think Cousin Mary only got to 7, but Pretty Bad Boy got to 5. So after all these years of, getting the chum chart, and all of a sudden there you are, right beside Helen Reddy or whoever it was, I mean, it was just an incredible feeling that there's your band on the chum chart. So, and I know where people, when they go, I remember at one time, Gino would do this, we'd start Pretty Bad Boy and he would do this little goofy dance. And I would say to him, I said, "Dude, this song is paying our bills. Don't make fun of it. I mean, this song is paying our bills. It's heading to the top 10, So, and I wasn't angry with it, just saying like, so it sort of answer your question. No, I was proud as punch that I wrote a top 10 hit. I just wish it had have been top 10 all over the world, because
it did get to the States, right? I mean, it did.
Yeah, it did a bit. Yeah, we didn't have much of a go in the States. By the time we got to playing down there, we were pretty imbalanced, let's say. We were having too much fun.
Going back to the Reputation, obviously.
Well, we certainly deserved whatever reputation we got. You know, I mean, I didn't go out of my way to become Canada's pretty bad boy. It just sort of stuck because, you know, well, it's like when they did when Colin Brunton did that punk rock movie, The Last Pogo Jumps Again. He contacted me and said, everybody I'm talking to from Teenage Head and all those bands said the guy you got to talk to is Greg Godovitz. I said, I have nothing to do. I mean, I like those kids. We used to get them to open up, and I went and saw them all the time. He says, yeah, but they all said the same thing. We were doing something. You were doing it for real. You were really whatever that thing of what you're supposed to be a punk rock guy was. They said you were actually living that life. You know, you weren't putting it on. That was how you were. You know, and I could see that. You know,
the radio show, you had mentioned that earlier before we started the talking. In Toronto, you got to interview people. You got to interview an awful lot of people. What was your favorite interview out of all the ones that you did talking to someone? Because obviously you're interviewing some people that you grew up listening to.
It was a question of waking up on Monday morning and thinking, who's in town? Which one of my heroes can I get on the line? Which one of my heroes can I talk to this week?
Right.
So it was an incredible array. Meatloaf, Alice Cooper, Andy Summers, Steve Lukather, Tommy James. It was just on and on. Jeff Emmerich that did the Beatles records. Mm-hmm. But I have to say, for the strangest and coolest one was Ray Davies was in town from the Kinks. And for me, it's always the top three English bands: Beatles, Stones, Kinks. No Who, no, those are the three. Those are the big ones. So I got his PR person to bring him in. We met at the Hilton down in Yorkville, or the Hyatt down in Yorkville. And he wouldn't come to the station, so I had to meet him at the hotel. Fair enough. You know, I'd done with Paul Rogers at the same place, went into his suite and talked to him. All good. He won't let me and my crew guy into his room. So they have his people bring a couch out into the corridor where he's living. And we sat on the couch. At least he let me sit down, which I thought was a nice gesture. And I'd really gone out of my way I always did, to do really good questions, because I knew what it was like, you know, to be in these circumstances where, unlike guys like yourself, they don't really do the homework. And it's a nightmare to answer these, like, you know, what's your favorite potato chip and stuff. So I really went out of my way to do, you know, in-depth questions. But he was giving me, I guess it was the end of a long day of interviews for him. He was giving me, yeah, no, I don't know, maybe, I don't know. I thought, this is not going well. So I went off the top of my head. I said, you know, Ray, I've always considered you the Charles Dickens of rock and roll. And he went, really? And I knew I had him right there. Then he became Chatty Cathy for me. And we talked, and I said, you know, it's not just, you know, the intelligent approach to your songwriting, it's the humor in your songs. Well, where do you see humor in my songs? And I said, well, for instance, Ducks on the Wall from the soap opera album. And he starts singing, my baby's got the most deplorable taste, but her biggest mistake is hanging over the fireplace. And I come in with the Dave Davis part, and I'm singing harmony. She's got ducks on the wall, ducks hanging on the wall. And I'm singing harmony with Ray Davis. Now, has the interview took a turn for the better? Oh, yeah. And he wanted to know more about the Charles Dickens thing. And I said, well, look at, you know, Waterloo Sunset or Dead End Street. You know, there's a crack up in the ceiling and the kitchen sink is leaking. Out of work and out of money. A Sunday joint dinner of bread and honey. And they knocked him out that someone had paid attention to, you know, I was qualifying the fact that he's the Charles Dickens of rock and roll. Yeah. And he bought it.
You could back it up.
So I have to say that one really jumped out.
We'll talk about going to Calgary very quickly. We're almost out of time, but you went to Calgary, you moved out there after being in Toronto forever. While you're there, you finally do a solo record. You got this. There we go.
I just happen to have a copy. It's called Amuse Me, also available at shopgreggodovitz.com. I did this with Go ahead. You asked me the question. I'll tell you no lies.
Well, you got to work with Paul Dean from Loverboy on that record,
Yeah.
and you had performed a lot with him over the course of time since you moved out to Calgary.
We've been friends forever. His wife, Denise, told me one day at a Loverboy gig in Calgary, they were playing an outdoor gig up by the Calgary Fort. And she says, you have no idea what an influence you were on those guys. And I said, I remember when they were in Streetheart, they came to see us every night of the week at the Gasworks. He says, yeah, because Paul was going, this is what we've got to do. Mm-hmm. This energy that these guys are putting out. And we were friends. They came to see us we did McEwen Hall in Calgary when they were putting Loverboy together. And I get a call from Bruce Allen, the manager of, he's managed Bryan Adams and BTO and Loverboy and everybody else under the sun. Hello, Greg, it's Bruce Allen. We're putting together a Canadian supergroup and your name came up. Yeah, hi, Bruce. Listen, I'm already in one, man. And I hung up the phone, and it was Loverboy. And Paul and I have laughed about it. He laughs a little bit louder than I do because, he ended up making $10 million and I didn't. But we're great friends. I mean, we still talk every week on the phone. And I got him out of his house. His wife was so thankful that I finally pulled him out of his mansion in Calgary to come to a little club called the Blues Can. And we would host a Sunday night jam. And I would sing and play. And Paul would be skulking in the background. But everybody knew it was bloody Paul Dean. So, of course, everybody wanted to come and jam with us. And we basically found the guys. And I was showing Paul these new songs I'd written. He said, these are the best songs you've ever written. Let's record them before I move back to BC. So we went in with all the top gun guys in Calgary, the cream of the crop. 3 best saxophone players, Mike Little, best Hammond B3 organ player I've ever heard of my life. A couple of different drummers, 3 different bass players who all said to me, how come you're not playing bass on this record? I said, well, I've heard me before. I want to hear what you do with this, So it was a real labor of love. And the album turned out to be the best thing that I've ever done, thanks to Paul producing it.
There was a great album. I got to ask very quickly, and I'm sure you've been asked this a million times, going back to Pretty Bad Boy, who was the kid's voice on that song?
Well, he was Russell. His name is Russell Nakashima. It was my roadie's girlfriend's sister's kid, and he was 4 years old. Mm-hmm. And because by virtue that his uncle was, working for the band, he would come to see us play when it was like high schools and stuff like that. And I fell in love with him. I just thought he was the greatest. He was such a little character, smart little kid. And he was a little tiny guy. And he had that little munchkin voice, He went everywhere with me. We went to movies. We went out for lunch. Mm-hmm. And I took him to the studio when we recorded. And we recorded Pretty Bad Boy. We got to that section, excuse me, where there should have been a guitar solo or something. Nothing worked. Gino tried, nothing. I played guitar, nothing. Drew Winters was playing the piano, nothing. Nothing worked. And then I went, I got it. Turned the garbage pail upside down. I picked up Russell, stuck him on the garbage pail. I said, Russell, this is a microphone right here. I said, when I point at you, I want you to say, I'm just a pretty bad boy. And we did it 4 times because there's 4 breaks. So he's got the first 2. We left the third one out because the last one comes in and he sounds like he's totally resigned to the fact that he's a pretty bad boy. I'm just it almost sounds like he's going to start crying, And I knew instantly that it was a hit record. I mean, we just looked around the room and went, this is a top 10 hit. And it was because of him. I'm
done. I can die now because I've always wanted to know who that voice was. Now I feel better now knowing.
Well, he was a great kid. I saw him when we did I think it was a 25th anniversary live album. And now he's like in his 30s and has learned the fine art of drinking. And we got him out to sing his part again. And he was so nervous, unlike he was when he was a kid. He was fearless. He's strangling me, like he's hugging me, and I'm trying to sing, and he's strangling me. And I've never really listened to that live record, but it must be funny sounding to hear him in his 30s doing, I'm just a pretty bad boy. But it was a real moment in time, and he got to play Maple Leaf Gardens twice. There's not many 4-year-olds that he told people in his kindergarten class that he was on the radio. And the teacher sent him into the corner and sent him to the office for lying to his classmates. So, of course, his mother goes in with the record and she said, when my boy says he's on the radio, he's on the radio. And she had to apologize publicly to the little guy.
Wow. Thank you so much for being with us today, Greg. It's been an awesome talk.
It has been great.
You're, again, like you're one of the guys that I think a lot of people, when they're growing up and they want to be a rock star, they can look at you and say, that's fun. That's what I want to do.
Unfortunately, you end up looking like that. That's the only problem. I would like to say to people, please, please go out and buy my books. They took me years to write them. Will you take a look, as the Beatles said. And the third one, hopefully I'm going to have the third one done, not in 6 years like this one took, but I'm going to have it ready for Christmas this year.
Great.
I'm calling the next book The Idiots Trilogy Part 4.
That's awesome. Thank you so much again, Greg. It's been a hoot.
Let's do it again.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to.